Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. Stu Clark here. Today we're going to do part 2 of the Shooting Bank B video. So if you haven't watched any of my Shooting Bank videos, I'd highly encourage you to take a look at them and give you an idea of kind of how I've set my camera up. And this is basically from a wildlife photographer's perspective. But today we're going to take a look at Shooting Bank B and how I've set it up from the video side of it. This one is about 30 frames per second and real-time audio. So it's going to be real-time video and real-time audio, where Shooting Bank A was about slow motion. And that was about shooting at 120 frames per second and then slowing it down in DaVinci Resolve. And so that we can, kind of capitalize on those really short duration videos. With Shooting Bank B, this is going to be a lot more things like warblers and wrens singing. It's going to be owls in the forest. So we're typically going to be, like I said, that real-time audio. I want to capture that bird singing and then obviously playback on a 30 frames per second timeline. Same thing with owls. It's going to be quite generally in a low light situation. And so in Shooting Bank A with 120 frames per second, the minimum shutter speed is ideally 1/250th a second. Shooting Bank B at 30 frames per second timeline, the recommended shutter speed is going to be about 1/60th a second. So we're actually going to be able to have a lot lower ISO. And that really plays into the forest environment. Like I said, a lot of the owls I was photographing a little saw-whet a couple weeks ago, the ISO is going to be running up to, if I was shooting it in Shooting Bank A, would have been 12,800, 16,000 ISO, and it just gets to be too high. And this camera, I'm comfortable at 6400 ISO. The video starts to get a little bit noisy, so that's where the 30 frames per second timeline, or 1/60th a second, allows for a lower ISO, and it's very important. So with this camera, obviously it's an 8K camera, but in 8K, you don't have access to some of the features. 4K for my uses right now will generally cover any of the foreseeable future uses that I need. A 55-inch 4K TV, I don't see replacing that with 8K anytime soon. The downside of 8K also is you end up with huge file sizes, both from storing and also the computer standpoint. You've got a lot of processing that's involved. So 8K is something that obviously down the road I'll be getting into it, but for now 4K will kind of definitely fit what I need to do. When I first got the camera, one of the main features I really liked when looking at the video side of it is the high-res zoom feature. It was the kind of the key feature. I was planning on building the 30 frames per second settings behind that high-res zoom feature, and it's really cool. When it works, it's amazing. You can actually set it where I had it set where the function 1 and function 2 were the zoom in, zoom out. Really liked it. It's amazing. It's super smooth, cinematic. It maintains 4K. It's not like you're cropping in on the 4K side of it. It maintains 4K. The problem is that when you're in high-res zoom, a number of features are not available, specifically on the autofocus side of things. When you have the high-res zoom feature enabled, number one, electronic VR is not enabled, which I don't generally use. My camera's generally going to be on a tripod if I'm shooting video anyway, so not critical for me there. But the problem is that I've really gotten used to using the Cycle AF on function 2 button. When you're utilizing the high-res zoom, none of those are available. It only enables the wide area large. The bigger problem is that it doesn't show the focus point. So when you're out trying to shoot video, it doesn't show you where the camera is actually focusing. And I find from a bird standpoint, I find it really difficult. Just because a lot of times this action happens so quickly. It's not like if you're on a fixed subject or person or something like that, you can zoom in to make sure that it's zoomed on the face correctly and it's focused on the face correctly. The problem, what I find is if you're shooting a bird on a branch, typical warbler singing, if you've got a branch intruding into the corner of the scene, I find with, for some reason, the high res zoom, it wants to pick up that branch and it'll zoom forward on your subject. And depending on how close that branch is to your subject, you might not realize it's out of focus. So it's definitely a feature I will utilize in Shooting Bank B, but it's going to be a feature I turn on as opposed to turn off. And when I say that, so initially it was going to be the feature that was enabled. Function 1, function 2, zoom in, zoom out. It sounds great on paper, sounds awesome. In practice out in the field, I just found too often it was picking up branches and picking up the wrong thing. So basically what it means is that I'm going to actually turn it off. And then when I'm in a situation where I've got the footage, it's great, I can then hit the I button, zoom in, turn it on, and then hopefully keep recording and then be able to zoom in and out and kind of utilize it once I've already captured a little bit of footage. Okay, so let's dive in. We're going to take a look at how I've set the camera up. So with these features, and I can't say this enough, this is settings that I'm finding are working for me. I've had the camera going on 6 months now, shot about probably pushing 50,000 images through it. So I have shot a lot with it. I've shot a lot of video with it. But some of these features that as the seasons change, I get different opportunities. So we're just kind of getting into warbler season here in the next couple of weeks. So there might be a few changes, but I'm pretty comfortable out shooting owls recently. Marsh wrens down at the estuary. Been shooting a lot of similar situations to what I want to utilize it for. And I'm pretty comfortable that these settings will work for me and hopefully they work for you. Okay, so let's get it all switched over to Shooting Bank B here. Again, so the I button we utilized in order to shift everything over to Shooting Bank B. So let's take a look at the in-camera settings for my Shooting Bank B video recording menu. When you're picking your settings, there's always going to be a bit of a compromise, whether it be file size, editability, also the features that are going to be available in the camera. And so depending on what you want to use, what features you want to use, and high-res zoom is a big example of that, where when you enable high-res zoom, a lot of the other features are disabled. So when you're picking your Shooting Bank, you really need to kind of make decisions based on that. Let's get into Shooting Bank B here. When you look, this is my forest and 30 frames per second menu. So as we scroll down, a lot of these will be default or won't be relevant to the Shooting Bank. We'll just kind of go over it quickly. The first thing we're going to get to is destination. And for this one, everything's going to CF Express. The SD card slot in this camera is not fast enough for a lot of different video recording formats. I only utilize that card on this camera. The SD card is simply an overflow for me. So for video file type, we've stepped it up to ProRes over the H.265 like we did in Shooting Bank A. ProRes has got a number of different benefits to it. One is going to be editability. So in the software, you're going to definitely be able to highlights and shadows. You've got going to have a little bit more adjustability there. One thing that a lot of people might not realize when you're dealing with whether ProRes versus H.265, H.265 is a highly compressed video format. It's a really effective video format for making a really small file. Counterintuitively though, it's really slow on the computer side of things. The reason being is the computer needs to uncompress the file in order to be able to work on it in DaVinci Resolve or Adobe Premiere. File formats like ProRes or NRAW, they're not compressed, so they actually run quicker in the editing software, and it's a little bit easier to utilize them. When you're using H.265, it's often better to be running to make proxy files, where you basically let DaVinci Resolve create a smaller file to go alongside it that it can then, that's what you edit off of, and then when you make the final edit, it basically utilizes the ProRes file. So for ProRes, we're going to go with the 422 HQ 10-bit, and we're going to shoot an N-Log. The reason we've chosen this one is this is the maximum quality file you can get while still being able to utilize the high-res zoom feature. So like I said, as much as that's going to be a feature we're going to turn on, I still want to be able to access it. So this is going to be the top quality video format you can utilize and still enable the high-res zoom. We're going to choose N-Log here as well. And so with N-Log, something to be aware of is when you shoot in auto ISO, N-Log only works from 800 and above. It doesn't work below 800 ISO in auto ISO. You actually have to switch to manual ISO to adjust it. really like using N-Log. Just throw a LUT on it, and which is a lookup table, which is the color correction in DaVinci Resolve or Premiere, whatever video editing software you're using. You can actually download the LUT from Nikon. So you actually go to the Nikon website, you can download the LUT there. And it's just great. It does a really nice job of getting you to a nice editable stage from a color standpoint. It does a really nice job. I really like it. So 4K 30p. So this one is designed for playback at 30 frames per second on a 30 frames per second timeline. So basically it's all about real time. And that way it's what you see in the field is basically what you're going to watch when you're watching the video playback. The video quality, that's for NRAW, that doesn't apply to ProRes. Video image area, we're going to be an FX. So extended oversampling on. And this basically, the camera utilizes the 8K and basically downsamples for a higher quality 4K video. So I'll have this feature on setting on all my video banks. With this one, I'm going to be shooting with auto ISO on. So auto ISO with N-Log, it's basically going to shoot auto ISO to 800 ISO and higher. To get below 800 ISO, you have to switch to manual mode. You have to turn auto ISO off. Not ideal, but you'll find with this setting, most of the time in the forest, that will be a workable solution. Unless it's a bright day, generally 800 ISO and lower will be more of a sunny day. With these settings, because I want to be able to switch between photo and video, putting a neutral density filter on the front of my big lens just doesn't make sense, because then you're going to be constantly trying to take the filter on and off in order to switch between photo and video. And the way I want to utilize this is that I basically flick the switch to video, hit record, stop the recording, flick to photo, and can start shooting, and not having there's no muss or fuss to go back and forth between them. And I find that really important. So white balance, I shoot auto 2, which is a bit on the warm side. It's a personal preference for me, and I find I like the quality I get out of it, and it makes sense for, I've been happy with the white balance I get out of this camera with auto 2. All this stuff's going to be off, and basically this would be if you're shooting inside, and we won't, this settings are for outdoors in the forest specifically. So these will all be off. Video flicker reduction just left on auto, but again, it won't be used. So metering, matrix metering is very important for this setting. And because this one, if you've got hot spots, if your bird is in the shadows, you basically want to have a reading of the entire sensor when you're trying to meter. So matrix metering is very important because basically it's reading your whole scene, and then you can just apply exposure compensation as needed. So it's very, very important to have matrix metering. As opposed to center weighted or highlight weighted. Then you'll end up with a really blown out hot, bright spot or really dark shadows. You end up kind of an either or situation where matrix metering will generally give you a nice balance in the middle of it all. So let's get into the focus mode. So the focus mode, we're going to be picking AFF as the go out the door focus mode. This one I could definitely see switching to continuous AFC where you want it to kind of turn off. You don't want it to always be focusing. And I think there's some real value to that one, especially if you've got a warbler on a branch singing. And if you do find that the focus wants to jump here and there, switching to AFC means you can just focus on the head of the bird, and it's generally going to be on a level plane, so you don't really need it to be, there's going to be very little focus adjustment. So just basically with AFC, you press the AF on button, it focuses, you take your thumb off, and it stops focusing. I think there's some real value for that in this mode. And we'll see as we get into warbler season here in the coming weeks, that's a good chance I'll be switching it to AFC for a lot of those in the forest shoots. Same thing with owls. Where I did notice when you're getting into lower light situations with AFF, it does want to kind of hunt for you on you sometimes. So if you just go to AFC, you focus on the eye, you're not getting a lot of movement in the scene itself, so you really don't need that fine adjustment focusing. Once it's focused, it'll generally be really, really close that you don't need any focus adjustment. It's better than having the camera rack focus trying to look for the subject. So I think AFC might make sense for this setting. But for now, I'm going to leave it at AFF. Just to kind of, we'll see as the season progresses. Like I said, I might that one might get switched. So with AF area mode, said in this one, auto area AF is no longer enabled in my Shooting Bank B. It works great from an estuary setting if you've got nice separation of your subject from the background. It works in a lot of situations, but where I found in a tree situation, if you're trying to pull a subject out of a tree. And so one thing to keep in mind when you're looking with the camera like this, as a bird photographer, it's obviously about getting images and recording images. Sometimes it's also about IDing the subject, and you just want to be able to pick the subject out of a tree. So it's not always about getting the best shot. Sometimes it's just trying to get a shot, trying to get a subject. You get a rare bird flying through, you want some footage of it or a photo of it. So taking the auto area AF out of the equation, I found in a forest situation, the trees and the bushes is just far too likely to pick up a leaf, a branch, and just pull focus forward. So I've kind of eliminated that one. And with this one, I've gone to the wide area AF, and I've got it under C2. But what I've done here, I've gone to a medium-sized box in the middle. So it's not the large, it's not the small. It's kind of a medium one. I find it really works effectively. So with wide area AF, it does have subject tracking enabled. So the way the size of this one is large enough to fit over an owl's head. It'll fit over most of a warbler, but then it's going to subject track to the eye. So it's great. So, you've got a warbler moving in. Yes, you will have to move it, the box around a little bit. But what I do find with the subject tracking on this camera, it will subject track just outside of the box as well. So depending on which way the bird is facing, with this box, you almost don't need to move it. It almost is effective for most of your subject and your composition from the middle. You might only have to move it over just a notch or two back and forth in order to keep it on the eye of your subject. So it's really effective, and I found it to work really well, but it's small enough of the box that you can eliminate the branches, the leaves, and anything else from getting into the frame and having the camera pick up on it. So far I've been really, really happy with this for in-forest situations. And then I'll combine that with the single point. And these two have kind of switched it up from the auto area AF and the single point. And so all I'm doing is I'm kind of narrowing down my focus options, just kind of tightening up where I'm allowing the camera to look for focus. Going from the auto area, which is the full sensor, and I want to control a little bit tighter in a smaller box area. And I think it's working really effectively for me. And I really like it. Subject detection, obviously going to be birds. Vibration reduction again, with FTZ adapted lenses like I typically use, my 200 to 500, that'll be the vibration reduction will be set on the camera. Almost always sport, except for in the owl situations when you're getting into that 1/20th, 1/10th of a second situation, then I'll drop it down to VR normal, and then you get a higher level of vibration reduction. So the VR normal is great in those really low light situations. But typically on a tripod, VR Sport's fine. If you want a handhold video, vibration reduction on normal is better. So there is benefit to it. You might get some correction randomly through the video though, if you're moving too much, where the vibration reduction needs to kind of recenter the subject. So you might get some jumps randomly with VR normal, but that's something just to be aware of. But it is really good if you are in a situation where you can't get stable, you're not on a tripod, you're trying to handhold in an awkward position, VR normal will give you better stability and is worth turning on. Electronic VR will almost always be off. Again, for me, I'm always on a tripod when I'm going to be shooting video, especially at 30 frames per second video. So when you're shooting video, the 120 frames per second video, because it's slowed down, because you're basically slowing it down to 30 frames per second on your timeline, it's a quarter of the speed. So any little movement is slowed down a quarter. So it takes a lot of the jitters out. When you're shooting with 30 frames per second, all those jitters show, and it's really, really shaky. So hand holding at 30 frames per second is a lot more difficult than hand holding at 120 frames per second. So 30 frames per second in this video mode, it's really going to be about on a tripod setup. And so That's kind of my setting. So electronic VR will help some of that, but electronic VR basically crops the image in to kind of eliminate the shake. So basically just kind of condenses your image to a smaller image and kind of eliminates the shake on the outside edges. You do sometimes get what they call like a jello effect, where right at the very edges, you will see kind of, you'll really notice it on GoPro footage. If you look at the edges of any GoPro footage, any sort of movement, you get quite a bit of jello effect. So it's not ideal. For my sake, for my take with the way I'm going to be using this Shooting Bank B, on a tripod, electronic VR is going to be off. And that's typically the way I will be utilizing it. Microphone sensitivity will be on either on automatic or manual, and I'll set it at 15. And it will depend on how I'm using it. When I've got the shotgun mic on there, I will set it manually at 15, and that kind of gives me manually at 15 and then 5 on my shotgun mic. And there's settings where I find I get typically good audio without clipping too much at the top end, but it's not super quiet. It gives me a nice balanced audio, which, unless it's in a really loud environment, has worked really well for me. So the attenuator is meant for loud situations, and it prevents the it lowers the gain of the microphone to avoid clipping loud noises. So if you're for recording birds and the like, you generally want this off. It would be useful if you're down at the river taking videos of American dippers, things like that, where you've got a loud ambient noise, high wind noise, things like that. It would probably make sense to have it on, but for most situations in the forest, having this off would be the ideal situation. A frequency response, because we're going to be recording birds, you want this on wide, and this will allow for the higher pitched calls, and then that would be typically filtered out on a vocal range. So you do want to have the wide range on. Wind noise reduction on. You're always going to be dealing with wind in almost all kind of environments. Even in the forest, you will get some wind noise. So that one, you might find if you're trying to record warblers and stuff, and it is really calm, it might be beneficial to turn it off. But for me, I've left it on for most situations. And everything else is at default. Okay, great. Well, thanks for watching. This video will be followed up with the custom settings menu video in the next couple days. And I sign off with some raw footage from some warblers this week, give you an idea of how well the custom wide area AF focus point is working in a very difficult situation. Take care. Till next time. See you out there.